Hello and welcome into the Sporting Pod. Along with Mauricio Ruiz, I'm Pepper. And we are going to jump in to the start of the USL Championship season in just a moment. Before we start, I want to remind you to sign up to be a member of Sporting Jacks. It is absolutely free. Just go to sportingjacks.com. You get a discount on team merchandise, special VIP events, and a chance to be entered in to win special prizes. Plus, you can put your season ticket deposit down there if you would like as well. Had a number of people do just that over the weekend at our watch party at Island Wing. And we'll have some more information on our watch party that's coming up. We're going to be on the 21st of March, that's a Thursday, watching the U.S. against Jamaica in the CONCACAF Nations League Cup. This is the semifinals, and Mauricio will be over at Island Wing Company on Southside Boulevard, the Tinseltown location. I know you missed the last watch party, but I can tell you, great time out there, and had all kinds of folks excited about what's happening with Sporting Jacks.
Yeah, and we'll be partnering with American Outlaws against the Reggae Boys, so always a fun game. The Nations League semifinals and finals be a great warm up for the Copa America that's coming up this summer. So I know the Jacksonville community, the American Outlaws, and the soccer community in general are excited to see how the U.S. will perform this year. So we want to be alongside of that.
Yeah, you want to come out and enjoy the U.S. men's national team with some fans and get that kind of experience that you can only get with the American Outlaws. Come on out and join us on Thursday.
And it's spring break anyway, so no excuse for kids or whatever the case might be. So
depending on who has kids in different spring breaks.
Come on out.
All right. Let's jump right into it. And I want to talk about what we learned from week one of the USL Championship season. And I'm going to start with the big picture takeaways. You were able to watch and scout all of the games. So tell me, what is your sort of general takeaway from the first week of the season?
So first week is always a little bit tentative for most people, right? Especially the returning teams. We talk about the USL Championship having a pretty decent amount of turnover of roster. So when you have that much turnover roster, you do look slightly different than you were the previous years. Surprised to look at some of the numbers and see a lot of the top teams were able to retain a lot of their players. Certainly one or two players here or there, and that's natural all over the world, especially in your subcategory leagues, Division IIs and whatnot. But you look at Sacramento, you look at Orange County, even Phoenix for that matter, they were able to retain quite a bit of their players. So a lot of those teams, they look strong, Cole, coming off the gates. But as most coaches are, they're a bit of innovators. They always want to try something a little bit new. So I kind of wanted my takeaway with some of the kind of like the big names, right? It's San Antonio. Mm-hmm. I was really surprised and impressed of Coach Allen's just improvement of what San Antonio looked like last year. They were really defensive, direct, but create a lot of chances because of their directness and how fast they went from defense to offense transition. And it was impressive and fun to watch because, they created goals out of nothing. This year, it looks like the development of the team, now that there's more of a retention of players, as I was kind of referring to, allows you to work on the hardest part of the game, which is the building out of the back, the development from goalkeeper through midfield all the way to the forwards. So they got hurt a little bit in that game because of it, but I think he would look back and say, you know what, we did really well from a performance standpoint, and I would imagine the metrics in the game would have supported that.
And if you want to see a little more of those highlights, you can check out the Sporting Jacks report that we did this week. That was our featured game where Mauricio really broke it down. Let's look at some of these other games. And again, I think you can't look at one game and just say this is the way it's going to be all season long. Things are going to change over the course of the year. But when you see Memphis 901 come out with a 2-1 victory at home against the Las Vegas Lights, Knight Pickering with the go-ahead goal in the end of the first half. Memphis, I think, has to be very pleased to be starting out with 3 points against the Las Vegas team that has undergone all kinds of change in the offseason.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, if you remove the jersey or the emblem from each team and remove the fact that they were playing a home or away and the storyline behind returning team versus new roster, new coaching, new management, new ownership. Vegas looked like the better team in that game.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bit of an energy to Vegas, but they're also missing Charlie Adams, which is a big signing that came over from San Diego Loyal last year. He was actually he was on the lineup about an hour and a half before the game, so something must have happened, injury or flu-like symptoms. He wasn't released, so he's a big linchpin in what they want to do. But I mean, their roster is, talk about a turnover roster, right? But there's an energy to what they're doing, their style of play. They're on the road playing against a really well-organized, Memphis team, and experience and team kind of unity. Won that game, a bit of a home crowd advantage as well, but Vegas actually looked pretty good.
Yeah, I think you're going to see Vegas be much better this year as time goes on. Next game we want to look at, New Mexico United, a 1-0 win over the Pittsburgh Riverhounds. Greg Hurst scoring in the 44th minute is the only goal of the game. Again, talk about a well-organized. Pittsburgh always, comes in with a plan. They played 5 at the back for most of this game as they tried to get a point away, but the one goal stood up right before halftime.
It did, and New Mexico is a team that we talked about. They're going to be fun and exciting to watch, especially when they get to play in front of that home crowd. I mean, it was a packed stadium. It looked like just like a European kind of style, feel of a game. So they get behind it. Pittsburgh, they were a team. They lost their leading goal scorer from last year. He went over to Rhode Island in Alberdiqua, the Golden Boot winner of the league. And Pittsburgh has always been a really well-organized team that missed that kind of final product, just the way that they play. And that's exactly what they're missing here. When you can't replace 22 goals like that, certainly not at the beginning of the season. But New Mexico, I think they're going to be a fun team. The team last year, they were always good, but never great. At any given point in the season, they were never great. They started off on a good momentum with 3 points. So let's see kind of how far they can go.
I think over 11,000 on hand for that one. It was a great crowd.
A great atmosphere, yeah.
Really had a lot of, as you mentioned, it did have that sort of atmosphere we talked about a couple of weeks ago that draws you in on a television broadcast when you get the fans into it.
I mean, you're talking about New Mexico and many other teams in the league. You look at Sacramento, Oakland, and Orange County. I mean, 11,000. I mean, that's, that is... like you're talking about in a Loon Town, right? I mean, that is bigger than their capacity, right? So it's the consistency of it over the season to see kind of how those crowds stay at a high level.
Next up, Miami. Maybe the surprise performance of the first weekend. Miami FC, that was roundly picked to be a last place team, a 2-0 victory over Colorado Springs Switchbacks. Andrew Booth scoring in the 16th, and then Manuel Bota with the penalty in the 85th. But, Miami, they showed a little something that I don't know that I was expecting right out of the gate this year.
They did, and I think it was a little bit of an opportunity there against Colorado Switchbacks, which is a team that lost a lot of their attacking power. They do have some really good players. Speedy Williams in the midfield wasn't available for that game. Probably one of the best defensive mids in the league. But Miami, Antonio Nocerini is a brand new coach, former AC Milan, former Orlando City player. Kind of a debut as a head coach. He's been going through his badges and his licenses, but this is a first debut as a coach, and he's got the team really well organized, as you would imagine most Italian coaches would if he comes from that pipeline. So he was. I think it's a team that we weren't expecting much going from transition last year to this year, but they seem to have put together a really nice roster, and the coach Nocerini making his debut with a win.
Looked like they'd already established their personality.
They did.
They know
absolutely,
what kind of team they're going to be. The only 0-0 in the first weekend: North Carolina FC and Charleston Battery. The old Southern Derby there. I don't know if you got much out of it. Some 0-0s are not much to write home about. Some have a little more action. What did you see in this one?
Well, from a coaching perspective, you always appreciate what the game plan is, if they're able to execute, if there's any adjustments that they were made to it. And, North Carolina is a team that they didn't really boost up their roster moving from League One to Championship that much. A couple players here and there, but largely about 60 to 70% of the roster is the same roster that won League One last year. So they were really well organized. They defended a kind of 3-4-3, which really mounted to a 5-4-1 at times because, the wing backs just kind of sit back in the deep block. And Battery is a team similar to San Antonio that goes south to north really, really fast. So if you want to play a transition game against Battery, you're going to lose most of the times, like most teams did last year. So North Carolina said, we're not going to do that, right? We're kind of new into the league, new players, new speed, new physicality. So they set in and they defended really, really well, and they were super organized, and Battery really couldn't break them down.
Battery had 2-1 advantage in terms of possession in that game, and still not able to find the goal. We mentioned San Antonio and their development and what happened there. 2-2 with Loudoun United. only red card of the weekend came in this game in the 29th minute. So you're talking about Loudoun playing a man down and a goal down for most of the game. And yet they were able to get the goal late with Florian Vallo knocking one in 4 minutes into stoppage time to level. And Loudoun has to be ecstatic to come home with a point. San Antonio, you would think, pleased with the performance generally, but probably not the result.
Yeah, and that false sense of security, right? You're up 2-1, a man up, and you probably kind of go back to maybe you put some extra players in, you're saving some legs, or even early in the season because you're coming off a preseason, everyone's pretty fatigued. And Loudoun United, we talked about them being their first year away from their parent club. DC United, full integration away from it, where last year that was part of the transition still. So you look at the roster of Loudoun United, they've matured their roster quite a bit. And you look at, the player that scored the tying goal, Florian Vallo, that came from Miami. There are a lot of veteran players. There are not that many high numbers left on that roster. Loudoun United last year were typically 55s and 67s and 42s, which represent academy players, and that's what they were. They were DC United second-team players, if you would, and that's what Loudoun United was used for in the past. But Loudoun United now, it's a whole independent club. I think there's still some stake ownership of DC United, but really minor. That's not really influential, more on the technical side. So I think you're going to see Loudoun United surprise a lot of people this year. Maybe they were the young team in the past, maybe a little immature, probably not being able to come back from a 2-1 player down deficit last year, but it's a new Loudoun United club. So San Antonio may be a little false sense of security in that game.
All right, the 5 goal scorers that we highlighted on the Sporting Jacks report last week included one guy who found the net, and that is Romario Williams, scoring on a penalty in the 13th minute for Hartford, as Hartford Athletic took out El Paso Locomotive 1-0, despite the fact that the Locomotive had a 2-1 possession advantage, and 3 of the top 5 players in terms of number of passes this week in the USL Championship were all on El Paso's roster.
Yeah, and El Paso's a team that maybe to their own fault, they overpossess. Sometimes they go round and round, in and back out, and they're really patient in what they do. And they'll win a lot of games doing that because teams will have to open up, especially if El Paso goes up first on someone. The other team has to come out a little bit, but the opposite happened here with Hartford, right? Hartford scored first on a PK with Romario. Bit of a questionable soft PK, in my opinion, but no VAR in the USL Championship just yet. So, decisions on the field are decisions on the field. They're final. But you talked about Romario Williams. I think he's a player that if he can get off the ground early, as he did here with a PK, he's a player that should be continue to be 15-plus goals a season. And Hartford's a bit of a new team. Remember last year, I think it took them forever just to get a couple wins in the season. So getting off of a good start, hopefully propels them into a good, because I think they will have a roster that will create a lot of problems for people. Now, can they keep the ball away out of their own net? In this game they did, holding on to a 1-0, so that's a good promising start for them.
The defending champions lost 1-0 as Phoenix Rising losing to Birmingham Legion. Home game for Phoenix Rising and an old goal, which is just a brutal way to start a season after your championship.
Yeah, and in Phoenix Rising, they finished 5th in the season last year. I don't know if you remember that in the West. Now the West is really competitive, but Phoenix Rising were kind of a team that were just kind of always hanging around. At one point we were talking about them not even making the playoffs, and all of a sudden they had a really great run and all the way to the championship, but lose their coach, they lose a couple players on that roster, and I think Birmingham has a chip on their shoulder, right? It's a team that if you have to talk about the top 5 teams in the last 5 years, I think Birmingham makes it into that list, or kind of at least fighting to get into that list. So the fact that they were a little bit out and out, sporting director and President Jay Heaps is really well determined. He knows how to put a roster together, and I think they have a chip on their shoulder. And getting this result early will bode well for them because they are a team that we talked about their transfers in the offseason, but a lot of veteran offensive power. And so we do expect them to be a team that will challenge a lot of folks. And Phoenix, I think they're yet to see. It's a new coach, first-time head coach, coming off of a high season, but then losing a lot in the offseason. I think it'll be interesting to see what they're going to do.
Oakland Roots, a 2-1 win at home against Indy 11. Our old friend Jack Blake scoring for Indy. But the Roots getting a goal in the 3rd minute to jump on top. Blake equalized, and then 5 minutes into the second half, Oakland got the go-ahead goal. Oakland last year, in watching them, looked like they had better pieces than the results were necessarily showing. I don't know if you agree with that, but this is a good start for them.
It is, and I think that they did have great pieces, and they were probably one of the better teams going forward. But similar to what I mentioned to El Paso, even less productive than El Paso, just a lot of movement of the ball, but players often going negative. So they possessed well, went negative, and the more negative you go, well, that means you're close to your own goal. So they leaked a lot of goals off of errors in possession. So they weren't very well structured in possession when they lost the ball because of the errors of the field when they were possessing the ball. And then defensively, they're always wide, they're always open, and because they're super, super expensive and spread out. What I saw from this game is a much better defensive posture from Oakland. I think it doesn't take much to look at their team last year and say, hey, we were quite expensive and quite open. Teams were able to kind of come through as like a big sieve. So let's tighten up defensive a little bit. Brought a couple defensive players that will help with that. But as they went up, they really solidified themselves and they kind of, blocked down because Indy's a good team. And Indy's going to be able to kind of create a lot of chances on people.
All right, finally, Sacramento Republic and Orange County SC. This has got to be one of the most entertaining games of the year for a couple of reasons. First, you have Trevor Ammon, who was the USL League One Player of the Year last year, coming in, scoring 2 goals in his debut with Sacramento Republic. And that gets overshadowed by a goalie goal 6 minutes into stoppage time to pull a draw out of the hat for Orange County as Colin Shuttler headed one in off a corner. Boy, listen, you talk about games that sometimes are 2-2 and there might not be all that much in it. This one had everything.
Well, and it was the first game of the season. Yeah. I mean, you don't often see a goal, even though you're down 2-1. It's an extra time. Go up to try to score. I mean, you don't really see that. That talks about that rivalry in California there, right? And you obviously have a couple other teams in the state as well that will compete. But like, what a game! If you were to put that game on any other time, you're like, what are they competing for here? It's game 1 of the season. But great crowd, great atmosphere. 2 really good teams, by the way. Yeah. 2 teams that just know how to go about it. Sacramento, I mean, they led from beginning of the season to the end of the season last year. And Orange County at one point was right there. Orange County was in second place, flirting for first place. And even towards the end of the year, I think Sacramento dipped just slightly. Orange County kind of overtook them. So just a really good game to start off the season. I think the schedule's got that one right. Even though it's an algorithm that kind of tries to figure it out, but the schedule's got that one right. And what an entertaining game was. Just two really good teams, talent, organization. But you talk about the new player kind of coming up from Trevor Amon. Scored a beautiful header, not just a little kind of flick header, but just came in flying, and then a great little 1-2 step over, struck with his left foot on the near post. Just, what a player. And he's young, too. Yeah, we'll be seeing more of him for sure. There are some of the clubs that did not get a chance to open in the first week. Louisville City, we'll see them on Saturday taking on El Paso Locomotive in Texas. Rhode Island will make their debut at home against New Mexico United, first year in the league there. And Tampa Bay, we did not see the Rowdies. They'll host San Antonio on Saturday. And a couple more that we did not see in the opening weekend. Detroit City FC, they'll go to Colorado Springs. Tulsa goes to Las Vegas as the Lights have their debut at home under the new management, Jose Bautista and company. So those teams will open the season coming up this week. If you look overall at what we saw out of the first weekend, we mentioned Trevor Ammon as the sort of the feature player with 2 goals. Now leads the league. He's the only guy who scored 2 goals over the week. Any other players of note that you really thought shown themselves well that bear watching? Because one of the things I want to do with this podcast periodically is to help listeners in the Jacksonville area kind of get a better sense of the league that Sporting Jacks will be coming into. So any other, especially young players who might be there in a year or two? Yeah, and that's probably not a place where I really focused on this week, but a great point of focus kind of going into, what are the new young players that are coming into the league? Maybe that played a little bit last year but didn't get as many minutes, that are now having a more solidified role, that are starting the league from the beginning of the league as a starter. Because the amount of transfers that this league had last year to internationally or into the MLS was at a record-breaking, right? The MLS won't really claim a lot of players, even though there were quite a bit that went last year, and I'm happy to go through the list at some point. But we had a good amount of players that have transferred from the championship into the MLS. Once again, the MLS will not publicize that because they are They're just not in the business of raising up the level of the USL Championship, but internationally, they're happy to do it, right? Because they're in the U.S. market, and the quantity and value was actually more on international transfers. So I think the players will continue to see MLS Next Pro players are jumping into the USL League One or Championship. League One players are getting promoted into the USL, like Trevor Amon, as we talked about. So there's a lot of young players that are going to start making, or really want to take that jump to the next level, whatever the next level might be for them. And I think it'd be good for us to try to identify those early and maybe make some predictions as the season goes on.
Exactly. And as we look forward as well, one other piece of news this week for the USL Championship, Brooklyn FC will move into USL Championship for 2025, have their inaugural season next year. So the league continues to grow. And, of course, Jacksonville to follow, as well as some other clubs around the country who will be coming into the league over the next several years. Going to be a fun season to follow. Again, we're not going to spend every podcast just strictly looking at the USL Championship and what's happening, but we thought after the opening weekend it was worthy of a podcast. So
it was an exciting week.
Yeah,
it was
a lot of great soccer.
Some great soccer, some great talent on the field. Teams looked really well organized. I mean, I think there's this thing about U.S. soccer fans or soccer fans in general, that you don't really start looking at your lower division leagues. And I think if you had an opportunity to watch some of these games from Orange County, San Antonio, I mean, you were going to be like, wow, like this is a really high level. So, and we know there's some shift in the U.S. Open Cup, and I don't want the success of USL Championship teams have an asterisk because of that shift and kind of format. But I think there's going to be some teams that are deep this year, because what they've identified is that they need depth in order to be able to compete in a really long league that goes over the summer. The geography of the U.S. is large. So getting more depth, investing into the quality and resources of the team, I think you're going to see some U.S. Open Cup runs this year.
All right, we look forward to it. Again, we'll invite you to join us for our watch party for the U.S. men's national team taking on Jamaica. That's on Thursday, March the 21st at Island Wing Company in Tinseltown, the Southside Boulevard location. Just go to sportingjacks.com and go ahead and register. It's free, but RSVP for us so we know how many people are coming out. Just go to sportingjacks.com for that. For Mauricio Ruiz, I'm Cole Pepper. Thanks so much for listening to The Sporting Pod.